The impact of AI on video games.
Regardless of what we think, the world is going to decide, the marketplace is going to decide.
Globalization can be much more successful if you, rather than attempt to localize, you do personalization.
It's crucial for artists to learn this technology.
Legal department, they will probably urge you from putting any of these pieces directly into the game because of that risk.
People are saying like, oh, well, it's going to take my job. But are you going to quit doing the thing that you love?
Hi everyone, my name is Ninelle Anderson. I'm CEO of Devoted Studios and I'm a host at Devoted Speakeasy. Today we have a heated roundtable about the impact of AI on video games and video games artists specifically. As a follow-up to our recent Speakeasy episode, we wanted to make a roundtable where we can bring people from absolutely like veterans of the gaming industry and people who make a huge impact on what we're doing on a day-to-day basis and inspiring us, and also bring the expertise in the different fields from concept art, animation, tech arts, 3D modeling, and kind of dive into the little pieces and details of how this could impact from obviously not a great perspective, but maybe make our lives better. I would love to introduce Andrew Maximov, Daniel Dociu, Trammell Isaac, and Ryan Smith as our guests today. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves, say a couple words about your previous experience? Andrew, do you want to start?
Yeah, my name's Andrew. I've been making video games for a decade and a half now, which makes me feel really old. Worked on everything from, World of Tanks to mobile games at Gameloft to my last gig was as a tech art director for Naughty Dog on Uncharted and The Last of Us, and then eventually founding a company called Promethean AI, where we make artificial intelligence that works with artists to help them create and interact with virtual worlds. And so, yeah, obviously I have a peculiar angle on everything we have to talk about, but I think something that's very important to me is always putting artists first. Like I've been doing art education for artists for more than a decade now. I started teaching at the Academy of Arts back in Belarus, where I'm from, when I was 21, and helped co-run the Art Direction Summit for 10 years now at Game Developers Conference, and also at the same time help put together SIGGRAPH Real Time Live, where we break down the latest in arts technology. So yeah, happy to chat.
Fun. Thank you so much. Daniel, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, my name is Daniel Dociu. Next month I'll be reaching my 30th anniversary in video games. My background is in industrial design, product design, fine art, and teaching, and then got into actual product design for a while, back to teaching, and then since '93 I got myself into this mess called the video games development. So I've been sucked into this ever since.
Also, Daniel is the father of Guild Wars, that he is not really advertising as much in our call, but in my opinion, Daniel made a huge impact on video games. So don't be shy telling about that. Trammell, do you want to jump in?
I also have 30 years of experience making video games, and started off, one of my first games was Fallout and Fallout 2. Designed the Vault Boy, and he will live past my greater years, so that's a good thing. I currently am the VP of Art at Lethos Entertainment, where we are working on Web3 game for the next generation. So that's about me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Trammell. Ryan, you want to jump in?
Yeah, my name is Ryan Smith. I've been in the industry for about 13 years now. Got my start working at Digital Extremes. And since then I have worked at studios such as id Software, Santa Monica Studio, and I've been at Gearbox Software for a really long time for most of that. And now I am an R&D lead, art lead at Gearbox, where I do research and development specifically tailored for our art pipeline. So that includes all kinds of different stuff, from machine learning applications to just testing out a bunch of different softwares and just making sure that they have the latest and greatest technology, and that we have a leg up on all the competition when it comes to like what tools that we use to help artists get their jobs done faster.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for also making the life of artists easier, at least at Gearbox. Before we dive in and the questions about everybody's opinion on how we can utilize AI, how we should utilize AI, I would love for everyone to get on the same page of how does stable diffusion actually work, because we have the recent lawsuit filed by three amazing artists. It's a class action lawsuit about the artwork pretty much being stolen from artists and protect the artists. But it feels like stable diffusion doesn't really work like a collage service like it is identified in the lawsuit. Like, can somebody help me understand how does stable diffusion work and how actually it utilizes the artworks or gets inspired by them? Andrew, do you want to chime in?
Sure, I can jump in. I think there's multiple things to talk about here. Number one being that AI is in general so much broader than stable diffusion. As in the diffusion models are great, they've been very powerful. They've, provided us a lot of fundamental advances, but at the same time, the amount of AI applications that can serve game developers and artists goes much broader than that. I feel like that's point number one. Point number two is, yeah, I do think that the whole framework of seeing it as a collage tool is slightly technically underinformed. But at the same time, and this is full disclosure here, I'm advising the folks that are bringing that lawsuit on the technical aspects and how to frame that better. And there's definitely, some technical questions that have no legal framework surrounding them today. And when we want to talk technical aspects, I guess it's interesting because there's definitely a great problem solving aspect to artificial intelligence where we have the capacity to internalize whole concepts rather than specific like overfit concepts of a particular image or an object, but rather understand what a forest is versus an elven village and something like that. And those are incredibly powerful in generating ideas. And I feel that the capacity for that is very strong in diffusion models as well, and they can be quite helpful with that. And so, yeah, that part particularly does not necessarily warrant sort of a collage descriptor because the comprehension that we're getting is much more broad, is much more general, and in that sense, much more empowering. I think the risks or the concerns that people have is that there's a non-zero chance that this model will generate and a piece of art that, if it was generated by a human, you could quite legally be sued for intellectual property infringement or plagiarism. And so I feel like that is the scarier part, because if you talk to any enterprise company out there that has a sufficient legal department today, they will probably urge you from putting any of these pieces directly into the game because of that risk. Because if you're investing $100 million to $1 million into a product, you put it on the shelves, maybe even you print some Blu-rays, and then all of a sudden it has somebody else's intellectual property in there through the process of getting it out of this neural network. You're going to be in trouble. You're going to be liable. You're not going to be able to get enough damages or compensations from whoever used it or put it in there.
I mean, that could be a trouble, and it's actually the question probably to everyone here. The production of video games right now, especially if we're talking AA plus video games or AAA video games, the cost of it is insane. Like, unless you have like 100 million plus, 50 million plus to produce a game, it is prohibitive to even start doing this endeavor. That limits it to the countries like US or the countries where you can actually raise this amount of money to do the production. And actually, copyright laws and the protection of copyright laws in these countries are not as extensive as in US, for example. Do you guys think that we're going to see a more of a boom of video game development in those countries that is competitive to general European and US video game production, or not?
With the context of how, like, if AI is going to bolster the productivity of these countries where there's new investments, I think from a visual standpoint, it could enable cheaper production of games because of just the nature of the tools and the ability to type a prompt in and get something that kind of looks like what you're trying to make. When I look at tools like Stable Diffusion or Midjourney, for instance, I see it as a great way to get inspired by just kind of typing in something that I think that I like or that I want to see and getting a big list of or a big return on some artwork, and then just kind of like using that as reference gathering.
Thank you so much, Ryan. There's so much to unpack from your message, and I would love to start with the ideation part. And I think, Daniel, there's a lot that you can contribute on that. What is the difference between the using the AI for ideation versus using artists?
I speak for myself, but whenever I tackle a creative challenge, basically first I formulate my own prompts, so to speak. So I put in place for my own use. That's how the brain works, whether we are aware of it or not. And it's not AI. I mean, in my very limited experience in playing with it is not any different. I mean, you introduce prompts, those kind of, the machine just expedites the process by increasing the number of permutations and accelerating that process. So that, to me, it's just one of those moments for us. And there's, in my opinion, no need to resist it, or it's pointless to resist it. It's inevitable. You might as well embrace it and figure out ways to employ it and make yourself more productive and more creative.
Yeah, speaking of non-resistance, I know that Trimel is fully embracing it and in their production process. Trimel, do you want to chime in on that?
I think where we get jammed up is that we are trying to define what art is, and the only people that actually care about that are artists. The marketplace is going to determine what's art. So, like, for example, there's a lot of rappers out there that I don't consider rappers, but they're making a lot of money, and other people consider them rappers, but I don't, because they're not skilled, in my opinion.
Safe to be with the bass in your face, with the bitches in the place, rocking the place. Safe to be, ecstasy.
It's the same thing with art. If you say that AI art is not art because it was automatically generated, it doesn't matter what we think. The world is going to determine what is necessary or great or whatever adjective you want to apply to it. So regardless of what we think, the world is going to decide, the marketplace is going to decide. And if AI art is what they need and they can get it at a cheap price, I guarantee you that's where people are going. And you said, Daniel, something you said, like, yeah, the train's already left the station and it's not stopping. So obsolescence is what it is. It's basically making some people obsolete. And that's just what it is. Let's not sugarcoat it. Some people will lose their jobs because AI can do it faster. And we're only talking about this version of the AI. We're talking about 2 years from now, 3 years from now. Our so-called creativity, which you so eloquently broke down, Daniel, which is, there is no original ideas in the world. We've already been through a million iterations of variations of Batman and variations of Superman. They're all the same. They're all just derivative.
Everything's a copy of a copy of a copy.
And that's exactly what the AI is doing for us, is making these derivatives significantly faster. So you don't have to waste your time going through all the permutations. So, like, the fear that people have about them losing their jobs is exacerbated by the fact that, something that Ninel brought up, the fact that the cost to produce things is skyrocketing. So you can say, well, I would rather have 15 versions of this thing, or I can have one and I can pay, $900 a day to get it. So the artists themselves are putting themselves in a position by creating a marketplace that's unsustainable. So if you're saying, like, in order for me to get my whole game done, I have to spend $5 million just to get concepts, or I can run a couple iterations on this AI for free, guess what? AI is going to allow game developers to actually bring that cost down, probably most likely on the larger end, the the Blizzards, the Activisions, the Microsofts, etc. They're going to allow that cost to be brought down, and then hopefully, passed on to the consumer, so we can get games at a reasonable cost, because it didn't take them 7 years to make the next GTA 7. It didn't take them 8 years to make, Red Dead Redemption 5. These things are is part of the natural progression, and if we need to be able to shortcut some of these things in order to be able to survive. Because if you think about it, indie developers won't even be able to compete in a little bit. Anybody making anything less than 20 million, 50 million are not going to be able to compete, because the cost of creating that content is going to be through the roof. Just to be straight up and down, like, just because you're a good artist now doesn't mean you won't be a good artist later when AI is doing other stuff. So, like, people are saying, like, oh, well, it's going to, you're just going to take my job. But are you going to quit doing the thing that you love is the question. Because, like I said before, the marketplace is going to determine. If people are saying, I want something that was made by a person, if that becomes the cottage industry in the future, then your skill set is going to be necessary. And then you can charge whatever the hell you want, because people are going to be looking for that level of quality. It's the difference between buying something that was mass produced off assembly line and somebody hand making a shoe or something, or a purse. The cost of those goods are significantly different. H&M t-shirt versus, something that was, handmade by a cobbler. So I think that's where we are now. And again, the train's not stopping, so people need to get on board with it, or, see the world go by.
I fully agree with the distinction you are making. I don't think that, handcrafted, so to speak, traditional art, as in fine art and AI art, are mutually, or AI imagery are mutually exclusive. I think they serve different purposes, and the need for both will continue to be there. In my opinion, AI imaging basically expedites exponentially, indeed, the pre-production and the cost of the ideation process, and helps with kind of sifting out the bad ideas from the good ones, or whatever, kind of shaping the canyon, or the guardrails of what your product wants to be.
Andrew, Ryan, do you want to jump in as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I want to echo everything that's been said, but I think there's a couple of things. And obviously, I've been having these conversations for like 5-6 years now. So I feel like I've developed so much language, because obviously starting an AI company 5 years ago, it was all of the same things. But I feel like there's something that we don't talk enough about, where I feel like it would behoove us to take responsibility for. And that is where I think the reason we see such discontent a lot of the time is because of a warped perception of what an artist does and what an artist is in the industry. A lot of the time, especially from the newer people coming into the industry, taking big loans to go to an art school, and then assuming that, being able to sculpt in ZBrush, or, paint things in Photoshop, or use the right brushes is art. There's so much misconception about the creative process and what it is, that when we're showing this technology to people that turns words into images, for a lot of people that we have failed to educate on the fundamentals of art, like light, color, and composition, and shape, language, and intent, for them it seems like there is no room for them, and they have committed substantial financial resources to maybe securing that education, and they feel like they're so dreadfully left behind. And this is a struggle that we've had for such a long time. Like my first GDC talk 10 years ago was very much talking about the difference between beautiful and realistic, and how they're in no way correlated, and how being an artist, if you spend a decade learning how to produce realistic results, it does nothing for you, because that's not what you're paid for at the end of the day. That's not what your audience comes to you at the end of the day. And so I feel like in so many ways, especially for us, the people that have been in this industry for so long, there's some responsibility to be taken for communicating better to people what art really is. I think a lot of people say that, the technology sort of pushes or raises the bar. And I think my counter to that is always that it actually raises the floor, which is what we are going to see, is that for, a lot of the segment of the industry where that knowledge of light, color, composition, visual design and language is not as deep, whatever, Midjourney comes out with is going to be the bar. People are just going to say, okay, this is good enough in AAA. And hopefully more of the industry shifts towards AAA as a result of that. We're going to need those critical art skills that are right now very, very hard to come by. Every single artist that I've ever hired had to work with. Most of my work as an art director has been, how does it support our narrative, our language? Uh, Lighting is just such an utilized element that is always a struggle with everyone. And teaching artists to care about lighting and how it affects composition and contrast and color and all of these things that are fundamentally artistic, that we just as an industry are not even grappling with as something that is lacking. We just kind of lump it together with like, well, an artist is a person that produces pixels but also kind of knows about art. And I feel like that the separation is going to become more poignant over time. And this technology, if anything, is going to bring about more of that conversation and what is art and what artist does. And I feel like if we set our priorities straight and if we do our job educating, I feel like more people should be at ease, because they'll know that they will actually have more capacity to focus on the core artistic fundamentals. And for example, the way we present Promethean writing, when we're talking about it being a tool, we're always saying that it's a mech suit for the artist's brain, meaning every artist is profoundly empowered by it, but it needs an artist on the inside to make the decisions, to drive it, to arrive at something cohesive and coherent. And it's always interesting because every time I have these conversations with people that employ a lot of generative AI, and they assume that our artists are less needed, my counter to them is always that you need a broader coherent vision, and you can't have that without artists. Somebody actually needs to tie together your light, color, composition, and shape, language, and design choices.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of like steer the conversation into an area that's more about like us being part of this industry, like having agency on the messaging of AI and how we want to use it and adopt it culturally. I don't want to live in a world where like an artist lose their jobs because of they just have to charge so much money that it becomes more economically feasible to go with like AI generated artwork as an alternative. One of the things that I've been harping on, and I made a big Twitter thread about this recently, is that I think it's crucial for artists, especially concept artists, to learn this technology and adopt it into their own workflows. And when I say that, I don't mean become a prompt engineer. I mean, really understand the technology. One thing we haven't really done is talk too much about the capabilities of Stable Diffusion, because there's a bunch of different properties and use cases for how that works. And one of these things is taking the initial training database and fine-tuning it on other people's artwork. And that's where a lot of the copywriting concerns come in, because you could take like Yoji Shinkawa's like concept artwork and take his whole library and fine-tune a Stable Diffusion model and just like rip off all of his stuff if you want to. Obviously, that's not good. But where it's really powerful is if you're a lead concept artist who's been working at a place for 15 years and you have an entire library of content for a specific art style, like Borderlands, for instance, it is going to be incredibly beneficial for you to take that catalog and fine-tune a Stable Diffusion model on that catalog that is your own content. It's owned by the company, right? So, and that right there goes to show you that if you put in the time and you understand the technology, you can adopt this to your own advantage, and you can lower your prices and take on more work and survive in an economy climate that is like continuously getting harder and harder to survive in. So I think that's just one of the things that I wanted to bring up and kind of just plead that artists just try to learn the technology a little bit and ethically source the data that you use to fine tune your own models, preferably with your own artwork, of course.
I love it. I love it. Like ethical usage of AI and deploying the tools they can speed up your creativity. And I know, Trumel, you've been playing a lot with Python tools and some other tech. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'm very basic in my Python knowledge. The great use of using, ChatGPT or something like that was it created Python script for me based on a prompt that I put in, create a script that didn't work, but it got me, 80% of the way. And I was able to take that script and fix it so that it would work with my limited knowledge. But along the way, I actually picked up some more, understanding of Python script based on its, code that it wrote. So it enhanced my ability to create Python scripts for Motion Builder in less than an hour, and in a way that I hadn't done in my 30 years of existence. So I see it as an extremely powerful tool if you look at it in a way, if you're adopting it in a way that it enhances your abilities and actually makes you more productive and useful in the game development sense or any other sense.
Well, it seems like there's areas, right, in the art production or game production related to art that is not as fun. Like I saw in Andrew's Promethean AI, there's this cool window where you can put all of the assets in the game, and in that window, we're using prompts actually find those assets and put them on the location instead of going to your SVN, FTP, Perforce, and try to search for those assets and then open up a file, and then it opens up. It takes like a few minutes and you're like, fuck, this is not the same chair I wanted. And then in Andrew's tool, all the imaging, like it's there. And I was like, wow, it's probably all the artists hate searching for the assets, especially if that's the asset from a previous game. What do you guys think would be a good ethical way of deploying AI? Is there any parts of the pipeline that, if streamlined, would make all of our lives better? I don't know any artist that loves unwrapping UV.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna touch on necessarily on the ethical, connotations, but something that you said prompted me to raise my hand, which is, when I rejoined NCSoft 7 months ago, and I got put in charge with leading globalization effort across all their studios, and that was it. That's my mandate. Help us make games that are of global appeal, Asian development, to be able to successfully appeal to the Western hemisphere and the other way around. My thinking is that building a kind of the spinal cord of games around those universal values is important. But the meat of the game in the context of today's ever bigger and ever broader games, the meat is outside of that area of intersection. And traditionally, we've been dealing with that through localization, which is dumbing down the experiences to the lowest common denominator and kind of making assumption on what is it Westerners like and what is it that Asians like, and just, kind of tailoring the areas that are outside of that intersection towards this average approximation, and it's my belief that globalization can be much more successful if you, rather than attempt to localize, you do personalization. Everything that's outside of that tree trunk or spinal cord, everything, every little minor experience, every step of the way, I run into my little quests or preferences that, by extracting and processing data about my own likes and dislikes and preferences, tailoring the minute by minute micro experiences.
No, absolutely. I see that a lot when it's live operation updates and you're like, and people are like, oh, well, it's Chinese New Year, or let's make a dragon and everything red and gold, right? And I'm sure it's way beyond that. Andrew, you wanted to chime in as well?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, definitely agree with Daniel that personalization is going to see a lot of interesting use from AI. But even today, I feel like there's two things. There's definitely something that you mentioned, Daniel, with just the asset comprehension, which is some of the most basic things, but it kind of boggles my mind still that sort of something that we've solved at Promethean and been supplying to studios for years now. There's some people that don't have access to that, where there's literally every company in the world is sitting on millions, if not 10 millions of dollars of assets that they have produced, and then they're having a tough time discovering that content when they need to access it later, a year or 2 or 5 or 10 from now. It's borderline impossible. And we're talking about animation. I've been at plenty of AAA studios when people are saying it's easier for me to go and recapture the same motion capture than just to find it in this literally like pile of animations that we've captured over the years, even though I know it's there. I've talked to many of outsourcing studios that say, I know we've produced this asset before and just don't know where it is. And it's just all of these things compounding is just such a simple thing that is not served by anything rather than AI right now. And it's very exciting to be able to fill that need. But the other thing I think, and this is kind of going back to what Ryan has said, is the fact that we can and should and will train sort of these top levels like transfer learning, additional levels of learning on top of their neural networks with our own specific styles. And I feel like that is what fundamentally is going to shape the industry in so many ways, because there's a lot of automation to be gained from this technology. But the biggest thing, and me personally as an artist, the concern that I have, right, is can it respect my personal style? Can it value what is unique to my creativity? And so when we're talking about these self-trained models, what happens is the artists, the people that are benefiting from the automation, are also the authors of the automation through the process of executing on their core expertise. I, as an artist, can build a tool that is going to speed up my work just by showing more of my work to it. And not only is it going to make me faster, it's also going to respect some of the decisions that I make, and it's going to infuse this automation with my own personal style. That is the holy grail. That is how I, as an artist, want to be treated. And that is how I, as an artist, want to get rid of the boring stuff. In my view, both as an artist and as an engineer, not just ethical, but empowering. Something that I very much want to see is artists empowered by this technology. And I want them to participate economically in all of the benefits that kind of come out of this technology. And to me, this is not only the ethical way, but also the economically empowering way as well.
So within those scenarios that you both of you guys brought up, Ryan. So what happens? Just playing devil's advocate. What happens when AI learns all your moves and it's cheaper to not use you anymore? So like Borderlands is a perfect example. If it's trained to do Borderlands work based on all of the Borderlands art, why do they need you anymore?
That's actually one of the things that I helped develop at Gearbox, is a way to essentially a custom built architecture that has nothing to do with Stable Diffusion or Midjourney. It's more of like a learned function that maps a normal map to an ink texture, essentially. So in Borderlands, all the artists go in after they create all their textures, and they spend a shit ton of time inking over everything. Sometimes this takes the exact same amount of time it takes to make the texture itself. For things like guns, it could take 3 weeks because there's so many details in all those normal maps for those guns. And across an entire game where they have to give a unique treatment, like a completely different data map that goes on top of a base color, that is months and months and months of work and a shit ton of money.
I'm talking about this.
What I did is I made an architecture and took all of our data from our previous games, and we have one-to-one between a normal map and an ink map in most time, because the artists typically use the normal map to trace over it to do their inks, and they add some embellishments later. So what we did is gathered up a database, built a custom architecture and a bespoke Python application so that they can load in a normal map and change some sliders, which we augment the input. So it does a couple of like transforms on the input, and they can see in real time how the AI spits that image out. They don't have to wait at all. Just drag a slider, you get the result. And it can inference all the way up to like 8192s because we do it in like little blocks, and then assemble the image back together. So they can do all of these things, and they get it 60 to 70% of the way there. And I think this touches on something, your question, Tramel, is like, what happens when an AI gets trained to completely replace it? So I don't really see that happening because, like I said, AI is a tool, not a silver bullet. So what it's doing is it's getting us 60 to 70% of the way there. And the rest of that 30%, you still need an artist to go in there and give embellishments to the inks to make it look like a human actually drew it, but it did all of the tedium and menial work for it already. Because these AIs, they essentially work with noise. Like they start with a noisy, blatant vector, and it generates it into something that is usable, but it can't make something that isn't already represented in that latent space, so to speak. So, for example, ours can't do like crosshatch marks because there's nothing in the curvature map that looks like a crosshatch, if that makes any sense. Because all it's doing is it's kind of like looking at the data that's there, and it is transforming that in some way. So if there's like no space to work on a transform, it can't do anything with it. I mean, I guess I don't want to get too technical. I guess it's not entirely true that an AI can't generate something from like nothing. You know what I mean? Like Stable Diffusion and Midjourney kind of like can create these beautiful images and stuff like that. But one of the things that I think Deep Inks is so great is like it still leaves work for the artist, and it leaves the fun work for these ink maps. They don't have to trace over everything. They can go in and do their comic book stuff.
One more quick comment to address Tramel's question. What do you do if the AI figures out who you are and makes you obsolete? Well, guess what? The AI can figure out who I was up to this point, but I don't want to be the same person for the next 20 years. AI mimicking my art can only serve, say, feeding new episodic live content to an already existent, IP or franchise. But going forward, I want to reinvent IPs. I want to reinvent, a franchise, evolve it. I keep telling people, hey, let's not do the same old thing over and over. Let's take the next chapter in the evolution of an IP to a completely new level. And very much like, there was the black and white King Kong, and then there was the retelling of the story with contemporary modern visual storytelling means. So I'm not one bit worried because I've been there, done that. I want to move on.
I guess the most essential question for the artist, what is next? Like, what are the skills you guys feel would be absolutely necessary, and how to stay relevant with the new emerging technologies and make sure that you keep your career going in the art and the video game industry?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and I think that kind of also feeds to the same question that Tramel had of like, well, when the AI knows everything about us, like, well, why does it need us? And I think the exciting part here to me is that I don't think it's quite possible, and here's the reason. The reason is that to me, in my experience of making art fundamentally, when you break down what making art is, the best I could distill it to was the process of assigning meaning. The job of an artist is to stimulate people, and we are stimulated by contrast. And contrast implies that we take exactly everything that we've done before, as Daniel has been taken, and then doing something directly opposite. And I feel like some of my most favorite examples of that, right? And I don't know if you guys have played the latest Guardians of the Galaxy game, and they had like Drax's homeworld, and Drax is like this big, tough dude that's supposed to be menacing and scary. And I would, as an art director, think, okay, shape language for a big, tough, scary dude, right? It's all squares and like blocks and like make it really, like balanced. And then they just went the entirely opposite direction. They all of a sudden just made everything circles, and everything was so smooth. And it played such amazing tricks with my mind where I was like, I entirely did not expect this to represent this character, that I felt that much more stimulated. And just that subversion of expectations and contrasts and assigning meanings and trying to show me something about the character that I did not expect or anticipate is in so many ways art. Like that was the deliberate choice to imbue these shapes, this language with a certain meaning. And that is what our job is supposed to be in so many ways. All of the modeling, or all of the texturing, all of the moving, pixels around, all of it is in service of figuring out a meaning that we can ascribe to all of these shapes and colors, and get it out there into the world. And so, ironically, the advice that I have to give to everybody today with the impending AI revolution is exactly the same I was given 10 years ago, which is learn lighting, color, composition, understand what it's like to be an artist versus a craftsman of putting together sculptures, or putting together 3D models and UVs and textures, and know that none of that has much to do with the core comprehension of art. And in one of the lectures I did years ago, there's this very clear distinction that the creative process is this much, and then this much of it is execution, and then this much of it is creative problem solving. It's these ideas that we have, and what are we actually going to do that is going to make this special. And then all of this time that we have here, there's no future in which all of it does not go away. If it's not AI, it's going to be something else. It doesn't matter. But execution is the part that adds least value, because that is the most automatable part. The part that makes it unique, the part that makes it yours, the part that makes your audience come to you is the creative problem solving that you have in your head, and use every single mean necessary at your disposal you can get your hands at to get better at that.
Tramal, what do you think would be the skills that people need to learn? What do you think will survive for the next at least 3-4 years?
Yeah, I don't think it'll be any, I think somebody touched on this earlier. I don't think it'll be any different than learning Photoshop or Substance or ZBrush or any other tool or aspect of game development that's come along that's changed the way that we do things. I've seen it time and time again, people who, are who are in the industry for a while, and something new comes along, and then you get the students that come in that are trained on that technology, and then they become obsolete because they're unwilling to change with the times. And this is no different than any other time before. We have to embrace what AI can do for us, and focus on all of the positive things that it can do for us, and free us up from doing the mundane. Ultimately, it will be touching every aspect of game development, not just concepts. It's already AI that can take a prompt and make 3D meshes out of it. So focus on adopting a new technology, finding processes that work for you, and you still need a skill set, your baseline skill set as an artist. You still need to learn those tools, just your traditional art. So focus on that, and then as I mentioned before, there is a need for people who only want to do it the old ways, and maybe there's a marketplace for that, but you still need to be prepared.
It's going to be an Etsy of video game art creation, a very crafty
Possibly.
one. Thank you, Tramal. Ryan, Daniel, any skills you think people need to double down on that still will be relevant for the next 4 years at least until AI takes over?
Yeah, I'll start with what Andrew was saying, but go a notch deeper. Color composition, lighting, absolutely instrumental. But at the end of the day, to me, these are means to an end. They address visual language, visual grammar. I would urge people, in addition to perfecting their fluency language and grammar, to focus on getting better at honing the message. And what I mean by that is you need to learn to absorb, distill, ferment all the information that the world throws at you. You need to teach yourself to be vulnerable and permeable to all these impulses or that you get from the world around you, and learn to process them into a meaningful message that you then urge to share. And that's when you resort to language, color, composition, lighting, whatever.
I do think that from what I'm seeing, there's absolutely niches in the video game development that have such a huge blue ocean or a gap or not enough talent, which is tech art, which is visual effects, which is lighting work, like working with engines and like this in between of the engineering and artwork, which is still creative. And if somebody is insecure and wants to like, what should I do? Try those. Please, we need you. We need you to explore more of these jobs. So not actually to take away from anything else that is being done. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining today's roundtable. Loved everything that I personally learned today. I do personally have a ton of fear still, because there's like the AI is learning so fast. I have no understanding how our lives going to look like in 3 years. So the only thing I could do is prep, develop more skills, make sure my team develops more skills, and we can stay relevant with any changes of the technology or the industry. So I suggest that to everyone else. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, it was a pleasure.